Welcome in, Hokie Nation, to this edition of TSL Today. We record on Monday, November 7th, 2022, and we got a lot to cover today. Both Tech men's and women's basketball open their seasons tonight in Castle Coliseum. All that and much more coming up on this edition of TSL Today, and it starts right now. Welcome back to this edition of TSL Today. Again, we are recording on Monday, November 7th, 2022 at the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center in Blacksburg, Virginia. Carter Hill filling in for Giovanni here today. Across the way, proud roommate and today's co-host, Kyle Marshak. Behind the scenes, today's best podcast producer in the land, Nick Brown. Kyle, a lot to talk about today. First off, we're going to talk about the men's team, then the women's team. Both seasons start tonight inside Castle Coliseum. First off, how are you? How excited are you for Hokie Hoops?
Hey, I got my coffee in me. Carter, you don't need coffee, so no. I think we're ready to go. And, with basketball coming up, it's great, especially with the struggle football's been. I think a lot of Hokies fans are ready for basketball season, so it's cool to have a double tip.
Ready for basketball, indeed. And I appreciate the Chick-fil-A you brought me before this.
Hey, no
it
problem.
Definitely got me filled. It definitely got me going. So let's look at this Tech men's basketball team. Picked 7th in the ACC preseason poll, coming off of that ACC championship a season ago. What do you think is the ceiling and the floor for Tech in 2022-23?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, with the run that they had in the postseason last year in the ACC tournament, that is, I think coming into this, it's pretty unpredictable, right? There's a lot of wiggle room. I think they built up in terms of depth and talent a little bit more, so they could have a stronger season in the regular season, that is. So I think this team will be a little bit more predictable, but you still don't know exactly what you're getting. With that being said, the ceiling, again, I'm going to keep it high considering the way they ran through the ACC tournament last year. I think there is a world where VT jumps teams like Miami, FSU, Notre Dame, maybe even Virginia, but maybe I'm pushing it there in order to slip into the 4th seed. For me, I think that's where they end up highest when it comes to their ACC play. And then for the floor, considering the inconsistency in shooting we've seen, I think that'd be their thorn in their side if they were to slip as low as 9th in the ACC with teams like Wake Forest, maybe NC State or Clemson jumping them, but that's kind of a stretch.
Well, the Hokies do lose Keve Luma down low, but they add Grant Basile from Wright State. So with that being said, is this preseason ranking at number 7 in the ACC fair, in your opinion, or unfair?
Yeah, 100%. I think 7 is very fair. Again, I think you have a little bit more wiggle room above that 7 scene as opposed to below. Again, that just comes down with the wiggle room you get with how unpredictable this team is. I mean, for a 3rd season after Wofford, for Mike Young to have a team that makes a run through the tournament, wins the ACC tournament, it's like, you never know what you're going to get, especially considering the fact that Storm Murphy was our point guard at the time, a guy who struggled to distribute the ball. I think Sean Padula should be better at that. So, I think it's fair, but again, more wiggle room above as opposed below.
Well, I think it's fair too. I can't help but agree there. I think Virginia Tech, keep in mind, they finished 7th last year in the regular season. They just went on that run in Brooklyn to reach the NCAA tournament and win the ACC. And it's virtually the same team you're bringing back. I mean, yes, Darius Maddox does step up at that starting 3 spot. Sean Padula will be your starting point guard. And then on top of that, like I said earlier, you lose Keve Luma, you bring in Grant Basile. But your core pieces, for the most part, are back. You lose Storm Murphy. You mentioned he struggled maybe early on in the season maybe more than people thought he would, coming over from the low major level, the mid-major level from Wofford. He comes into the ACC. Took him some time to find his form, but he did to his credit. And by the ACC tournament, he was a huge spark for this Hokies team. But Sean Padula is supposed to be a star for Tech going forward.
Yeah, I think, again, Sean Padula brings a different look at the point guard position. They both have similar styles where they're small-bodied guards who are shifty with the handles, although I think Padula is more consistent with his shooting, and his ball distribution should hopefully be a lot better. We saw it last year with Storm Murphy where, his goal was to feed the big guy, Aluma, down low. And even if he found his way to the wing or inside the arc, he really struggled to get that pass off to Aluma sometimes just because he was listed at 6 foot, and even 6 foot was a little bit of a stretch. Now, I've seen Padula up close. I think he actually is a legitimate 6'1", but again, everyone adds an inch or so to their height. So I think with the size, hopefully Padula should be a little bit better with the pass distribution.
Well, and of course, you bring back somebody like a Justin Mutz down low, a Hunter Couture on the wing, and then like we talked about, Padula, Maddox coming back as well. No Justin Mutz tonight, though, in the game against Delaware State. We could see Lynn Kidd get the nod in the starting rotation down there. Maybe Malijal Petit, the transfer from Rice, gets some time, but it'll be interesting to see how the Hokies look tonight had they been without Justin Mutz this season.
Yeah, you talk about the next question I know you were going to tee up for me, and I'll just skip right to it, was the concerns about the roster depth. I think that's a slight hole that we've still built upon, but considering you're in the ACC, you got to have a guy that you can trust at each position on the bench. I think we added a couple spots. Rodney Rice should be fun to watch once he's healthy. So we've added a couple guys off the bench that could help. But to your point, talking about guys who can come off the bench with Justin Mutz out, I'm excited to see Lynn Kidd. You and I had met him before, a kid who, being young, has a lot of energy. We've been there on media days and practices and stuff like that. He's one of those freshmen, now sophomores, that you're kind of excited to see. Him and Padula have grown close since they're in the same class too. So it's cool with Mutz out, with that NCAA violation, to possibly see Lynn Kidd stop into the 5, and we've seen him up close too. That dude is a legit 6'10", I can tell you that.
How bizarre is that too, by the way? The whole Justin Mutz deal.
Yeah.
But Lynn Kidd, Mike Young has talked about he is ready to take that step up. Sean Padula has talked about it. Hunter Couture talked about it at ACC Media Day. So I'm excited to see what Kidd could do for Virginia Tech this upcoming season. Okay, we talked about this a little bit a couple weeks ago with Chris Coleman. The non-conference schedule for Virginia Tech, favorable or not favorable? Your thoughts there?
100 billion% favorable. I think they loaded it up rather light, but they still squished in there a couple of good ones. I think the Charleston Classic should be interesting to see, but obviously the ones you're looking at in the non-conference, Minnesota, Dayton, Oklahoma State. I think considering the teams they have beforehand, obviously opening up with Delaware State, which is arguably one of the worst teams in the NCAA according to last year.
Really bad.
They're building up gradually, and you talked about it last week too. Virginia Tech, not necessarily a preseason exhibition team. You see a lot of ACC schools who have been doing that. Virginia Tech was never that type of team. They like to, do some undercover scrimmages, if you will, however you want to describe it, and then they go into the actual early season play. So I think they've actually laid up a pretty decent non-conference, because you have those easy ones, those gimmies, quote unquote, although you never know with college basketball, and then they get to Minnesota. Then it's North Carolina to open up ACC play. Then you get Dayton, then you get Oklahoma State. So I think they've lined it up rather well for them.
Well, and it's funny, Kyle, because last year I remember everybody talked about how tough Virginia Tech's non-conference schedule was, and it turned out not to be the case. Everybody that they played, they fell way short of expectations based on what they were supposed to do last season. Maryland is a perfect example. The one game that Virginia Tech did win that you think maybe that will be a quad one opportunity, the Terrapins were down bad last year, for lack of a better term. They ended up firing Mark Turgeon the day after Tech beat them up in College Park. The same day Brent Pry was introduced in Blacksburg, by the way.
I can't help but agree.
It was a good omen for the Hokies, I guess, then. And then Rocco Mendenhall got fired that week, too. But I digress. The Hokies, I know Nick Brown's laughing back there. The Hokies got 2 coaches fired within a week. So that was something. No, the Charleston Classic, I think, will present a unique challenge for Virginia Tech. You don't play that stud team like a Purdue, like the Hokies played a few seasons ago. ODU should be a solid team, a solid program. Penn State's actually gotten the Hokies number the last 2 times they played, but they are not a solid program at all. They are actually quite the opposite of ODU. They have not been in the NCAA tournament in who knows how many years. They just fired their head coach 2 years ago for some off the floor violations. You got a couple other teams in there that can maybe present some challenges to Tech, but I think actually I'd be very surprised if Tech did not win that Charleston Classic based on who is in the field. The first quad one opportunity for Tech, actually, I don't think will even be until December 4th when the Hokies host North Carolina, which obviously isn't even a non-conference opponent. Oklahoma State will be a tough one up at the Barclays Center, but hey, Brooklyn, a good omen for the Hokies. So, I mean, last year, Tech won the whole ACC up in Brooklyn, so maybe they can continue that magic against the Cowboys.
Yeah, I mean, I like, honestly, opening up ACC play against North Carolina, a team that, in my opinion, will very likely still be #1 in the nation at the time that they plan to open up ACC play. The reason I say that is because you kind of, after building up with better challenges like Minnesota right beforehand, obviously got the Charleston Classic, and then, a decent kind of build up with Minnesota, Dayton right after. I'm excited for that, honestly. A lot of people aren't fans of getting thrown right into the fire early in ACC play, but you get arguably the toughest opponent in the ACC out of the way like that. And that will be a true teller of where this team is at early on in ACC play. And then, maybe they'll build up by the time they maybe meet them in the ACC tournament following. You never know. Don't want to get too far ahead.
Well, and then you touched on Dayton. I know the Hokies are going to want to get the Flyers back after what happened last year up there. Mike Young said he will never make another trip to UD Arena unless it is for the first 4. What you got, Nick? What you got?
Well, I just wanted to talk about Dayton a little bit. That's a team and a half, by the way. Deron Holmes might be a All-American at the end of the season. That 6'10" guy that tore up the Hokies last season, and they're top 25 and kind of on revenge. They're calling it the COVID revenge season for the Flyers. I know they got screwed by COVID. They were going to be a number one.
They were going to have to win the
seed.
national championship that year.
Yeah, they were going to be a number one overall seed with Obi Toppin, and then COVID hit. So I know this is the season that they're dubbing the COVID revenge season. So people all want to talk about that North Carolina game, but that Dayton game just a few days later, that's going to be an insane game, and Dayton's going to be really, really good this season.
Well, and Dayton has that full court press too that can really cause the Hokies some trouble. I think Tech turned the ball over almost 20 times up there last year.
Yeah, dude, I love watching Dayton basketball. It's one of those teams in NCAA basketball where you're just like, if you're not a true NCAA fan of any sport, you haven't really heard of Dayton that much because they're not a Power 5 squad. They're in the A10, right? But they're that team. I guess it's unfair to compare basketball to football because it's very different, the differences between Power 5 and both. But, you know, Dayton's kind of that equivalent to like a Houston or Cincinnati or Tulane this year too, where they are not a Power 5 team, but they get a Power 5 schedule and they perform and they are fun to watch. So I'm excited for that game.
Then you got Oklahoma State, couple gimmies, Grambling State, but then you actually hit a decent stretch, not to go too far into the schedule, but Boston College on the road, Wake Forest on the road, Clemson, and NC State at home. There's an opportunity for the Hokies to go 4-0, and then you go to Syracuse. We'll see how good the Orange are this year, so maybe a good start for the Hokies in conference play.
Man, you know I'm from Syracuse, but I'm not going to be biased. Syracuse is not looking that strong this year.
They were losing to a D2 team at halftime a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, 33-32 was the score against Indiana University of Pennsylvania. Ooh. You and I thought it was IUPUI for a second. We're like, oh, no, it's actually a D2 school out of Pennsylvania. Look, man, Jim Boeheim is he's an old dude who has a long history at Syracuse. We'll see if he can turn that around.
Well, we'll have a good time up at the JMA Wireless.
I hope
for
so.
That game. We'll have a good time.
Yeah.
All right, quickly, Delaware State. Katie Adams talked about it on the Tech Sideline podcast earlier today. You alluded to it. The Hornets were 2-25 last year.
2-25.
0-14 in conference play.
Yeah, MEAC is not necessarily a conference that you can have a losing record and just be like, oh, it was a decent season. But like, you know, I looked at the statistics. They were second to last in the NCAA last year in offensive production, second to last in defensive efficiency. I mean, that is just a team who really struggles. And you know who that last team was? And a name I just mentioned, IUPUI.
Oh, really?
Is there a shortened name for IUPUI that I'm missing out on?
I think that's it right there.
Yeah, I don't know if you can
back to Nick Brown, the best podcast producer in the land.
I think the full name is Indiana University of Indiana, Purdue, University of Indianapolis.
That's
or something
really
stupid like that.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's
it's the Jaguars.
That's right. Yeah,
worst team in college.
You
basketball
know your college
season.
mascots. I'm surprised you didn't know that, Carter.
I didn't know that one. No.
Yeah, IUPUI. The Jags. They were horrible last year.
Yeah, they were winless, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, you're
I was looking at the RPIs last.
Well, I know you were originally.
They won one game, but it was a D2 opponent.
Okay.
So, yeah,
doesn't count.
Bad.
Yeah, it doesn't count.
Doesn't count. Okay, so Tech's probably going to win by 35, 40 points tonight, maybe. Yeah. I think they're favored by 33, and I maybe would still pick them to cover even without Justin Mutz. Though it is the first game, so what do you hope to see out of the Hokies tonight?
Well, with Mutz gone, my hope is to see guys like, hopefully Lynn Kidd slip into the 5. Grant Basilia would go to the 4. Maddox obviously at the 3. So my eyes are on Lynn Kidd, anyone else off the bench, and Sean Padula. Those are the two guys I'm looking at. I want to see what they can do to facilitate the offense. And for Lynn Kidd, he's a guy who's still young and still filling into his size. I mean, 6'10", you're a 19-year-old. Yeah. I don't know a 6'10", 19-year-old who's really filled in their frame yet. I'm looking to see him get physical.
He could fill that David Gasson role from a season ago. You know, he left for Kansas State. I'm excited to see Elijah Petit, the transfer from Rice. I actually think he's going to be really, really good.
Yeah. And you know what? Is Patrick Wessler? He's
a true freshman. I don't know how much
is he
play.
redshirting or?
I don't know. I don't know if he's going to redshirt or not. I don't think the plan is to redshirt him right now.
Okay. Well, he's the first legit 7-footer we've had on the roster in a handful of days. So, if he steps onto the court in a game like Delaware State, I'm excited to see him perform too, because the bench depth, I think, will be really telling of how we play in ACC play.
Nick, do you remember the last time Tech had a 7-footer? Was it Joey Van Zegeren? Was he 7 foot? You're like fourth chairing and producing at the same time.
I don't think Joey Van Zegeren.
Maybe he was 6'11". I remember he
hit it.
transferred to Northwestern, and they came back here for the ACC Big Ten Challenge, and he got booed out of his mind by the student section. I remember that.
Yeah, he was
Very
6'10".
vividly.
He was
6'10"?
only 6'10". So I think it was pre-2010 that Virginia Tech had a true 7-footer.
Where's David Cunningham when you need him?
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah, I
Well,
know.
you're kind
He
of
put out that
encyclopedia
list
yourself,
earlier.
Carter.
I'll look up
Okay,
later.
okay.
And we'll get
Well,
back.
we'll see what the Hokies do tonight. I think it should be interesting. I think people are very excited to see this Tech team go out there and see how they perform to open up the 2022-23 season. Well, we're just getting started today on TSL Today. When we come back, Kyle Marshak will bring us back. We're going to talk women's hoops. Hokies open up their season versus Mount St. Mary's tonight. Don't go anywhere. This is TSL Today.